I joined ISKCON in Chicago when the temple was in Evanston. For the viewers who may not know where Evanston is, there's a lot of people, I was surprised, here in America. Evanston is where Northwestern University is located. It's the first suburb north of Chicago. So I was 17 years old, long story. I moved into the temple in February 1973. A devotee said, why don't you come and stay for 3 days? 3 days went to a week went to a month. And 45 years have gone by. But we didn't see Prabhupada during 1973. He came to New York, Dallas, and Los Angeles. Chicago was out of the way. I was a new devotee. The temple president came here. And that's when I got the signal to go to India. And about a year to the day later, I did. And on the way, I asked in New York temple, and I found out that Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. And the flight actually stopped in Delhi, among other places. And I got out. They allowed me to make a phone call, which my bags were checked to Bombay, but I couldn't get a number. I didn't know any number in Vrindavan. But when I landed in Bombay, I was able to actually phone the temple. They came pick me up in a jeep. The late Sridhar Swami, who was a brahmachari at the time. Prabhupada came the next day. And we saw him at the airport. We went to receive him at the airport. And I remember hearing his voice, and it was just like on the cassettes, that because we were listening to Prabhupada's classes on the cassettes. It struck me at the time, that Prabhupada was the same as his tapes. So, Vani and Vapu aren't, well, they're different and they're not different. The Vani is more important, as Prabhupada taught. Philosophically, we were mesmerized. I mean, it wasn't a blind following cult. Prabhupada was teaching the Bhagavatam. And that came through. I always thought all these years that we weren't blind followers, but we were being taught traditional, Vedic system, the Vedic knowledge, which is different from, blindly following somebody who concocted his own philosophy. So that, right from the day one, living in the US and then coming to India. So when I came to Bombay, by coincidence, the Chicago GBC was Satsvarup Maharaj. He happened to have taken over as Prabhupada's personal secretary and servant. There was no servant at that time. I imagine there was a gap between Shrutakirti and Harishori or whoever. So he had to cook for Prabhupada, he had to massage Prabhupada and take care of the correspondence. And so he asked me if I would come and clean the pots after he cooked for Prabhupada. So it was a very simple service, and they're very tiny pots. So one day I was in the kitchen, and suddenly I was cleaning the pots, and the door flew open, and there was Prabhupada with just a kurta, no dhoti. It was a long kurta. And he said, he chastised me. He said, can't you hear someone's at the door? And of course I bowed down and I said, no, Srila Prabhupada. Well, go and get the door. And sure enough, somebody had been ringing the bell at the door. But in the kitchen and washing the pots, I couldn't hear it. And due to that service, I was able to stay for the darshan period. Can I go into that? So people used to come and meet Prabhupada from 4 to 5 every day. Respectable people. And I remember him showing Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj's, well, the late Bhakti Swarup Damodar's Scientific Basis of Krishna Consciousness book. And he was very proud of that book. And he was effusive is the right word. Very enthusiastic and he kept praising the book and how Krishna consciousness is not mental speculation, but it's scientific. And that struck me. I guess it was the preaching spirit. Prabhupada was always preaching. And another thing that struck me when Prabhupada was effusively praising to the high heavens this book of Bhakti Swarup Damodar, his disciple, was how much Prabhupada wanted his disciples to write. Of course, we're all distributing Prabhupada's books, but it's not that nobody else should write books. And the book should be based on, the Vedic outlook, the Vedic conclusion. I think the scientific basis of Krishna consciousness was just one of the beginning of different disciples who wrote. Of course, Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj was highly inspired by Prabhupada to preach. Prabhupada came to Madras, which is now called Chennai, on January 1st, 1976. So there was a 2-day program there. On the morning of the second day, we went on a morning walk with Prabhupada. And after that, there's an interesting story there. I was sent a day early to Nellore to check on the arrangements. So the next day, 3rd January, Prabhupada and I guess there were 20 devotees came by train. It was a 3-hour train ride from Madras, Chennai, to Nellore. It's 160 kilometers north of Chennai. So at the station were hundreds of townspeople, the mayor, girls in traditional dresses there's a system of having a coconut in a basket on your head. And these are little tiny girls, like 10 years of age. And then there's a traditional horn instrument called the nadaswaram. In North India, the Chennai is short. South India, nadaswaram, especially all over South. And there's these big drums that they play with it called the tawil. And then Brahmins chanting Vedic mantras from the Vedas. So you had these 3 groups, and the 4th group were the townspeople. And when the train arrived, the girls come up and they hand a coconut, or they stand there as a form of welcome. I think the Brahmanas have a full pot, which is called a kumbha, and they give it to him and they chant the mantras as a show of respect and as a part of the welcome. And the Nadaswarams are playing, and seeing all this, Prabhupada turned to the group of his disciples and said, Vedic culture is more intact in South India. The purport of that is that Prabhupada's movement is meant to spread Vedic culture. And what is culture? Dress, food, your daily activities, like early to bed and early to rise, which we have. Get up in the Brahma Muhurta. Immediately, in the morning, take a bath, cleanse yourself, brush your teeth, which many people around the world don't do. So all of these things are a part of Vedic culture. Shaving the head, keeping the sika, men wearing dhotis, women wearing saris, and sometime in the future, we changed our place of residence, those of us who went to India from here. We changed our religion. We changed our dress. We changed our names when we got initiated. We have to change our language because, Lord Krishna didn't speak in English. We believe he knows all the languages, but the Gita and the Bhagavad are spoken in Sanskritam. So that is on the deck, on the cards. It's on the table sometime. So Prabhupada said Vedic culture. So culture means many things. And specifically, Prabhupada was there to propagate Vedic culture. It comes throughout his books, his conversations, his lectures, and his letters. And so his aim was very clear, and he was always focused on that. So that's an example of how Prabhupada was focused on teaching to his disciples Vedic culture, even though he used English mostly. But there were some Hindi and Bengali lectures in India. So the reason why Prabhupada came to Nellore was that there were these 2 wealthy sisters. One was a widow and one a spinster, who lived together in a big house and who made a proposal by letter to Mahamsa Swami, who was the head of Hyderabad temple, which was at that time, well, then there was a temple that had opened later in Madras, in Chennai. But Hyderabad was the established temple in South India that they wanted to donate 3 acres of land. In fact, there was a correspondence, and Prabhupada told Mahamsa Swami to accept the donation. But when Prabhupada went there, there was a stipulation in that donation that if a temple wasn't built on that land within 3 years, the land would be given to the Ramakrishna mission. And so ultimately, Prabhupada did not accept the donation. However, he did agree to stay in the house of these women. It was a very spacious, I mean, he didn't stay alone. There was his whole, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was the secretary at the time. Hari Shori was the servant. And other sannyasis were there, like Achyutananda, Yashodananda, and I think Guru Kripa didn't come from Chennai. He was in Chennai. Anyway, we went on, Harikesh was there. Maybe he was, I can't remember, he was also there. And we went on the morning walk with Prabhupada. And as he came out of that big house, he saw a chicken coop, residence for chickens. And they weren't ordinary chickens. There were big, huge chickens, which are called Chinese hens. It's a different breed of chicken. So seeing this, Prabhupada addressed on the walk, there were like 10, 15 devotees with him. He said, in Bengal, people take the eggs of these chickens, boil it, and eat it with rice. He said, they are keeping these chickens means they are not vegetarian. Now, the community that those women were from is mostly non-vegetarian. Farmer community. So Prabhupada instructed, from today we will not eat what they cook. You have to cook for me separately, in separate pots. So Prabhupada was quite strict in India about differentiating between the vegetarians and the non-vegetarians. And he had told other devotees, don't eat in the homes of non-vegetarians. You can have fruit and milk. He told, Guru Kripa told me this. He was in Bangalore and they had contacted Prabhupada. But so this was a direct instruction, how, by his mentioning this, we should understand that we should never eat in the home of a non-vegetarian. However, in Tehran, he said, eat in anyone's house, but preach. So time and circumstance. But this is not time. Generally, the principle is don't eat in the home of a non-vegetarian. And that's Vedic culture. And that was very clear. He would not eat there, even though they were the hosts, and it might not look good to the hosts. In December of 1976, Prabhupada traveled from Hyderabad to Wardha, which is 2 hours southwest of Nagpur in central India. And Mohandas Karamchand Mahatma Gandhi had his ashram there called Sevashram. Giriraj Maharaj, at the time Brahmachari, had made friends with Ramakrishna Bajaj, whose father, Jamnalal Bajaj, was a big supporter of Gandhi and who had given this house in this place. It was a business family. So they're a wealthy business family. There was an Acharya's conference called by a surviving associate of Gandhi who was very famous all over India, Vinoba Bhave, who lived there. He was in his 80s at the time. Prabhupada was 80, 81, 80. And Swami Chidananda of the Divine Life, Swami Shivananda's Divine Life Society, was also there. During that 2-day program, Prabhupada went on a morning walk with his disciples, and there were like 25, 30 devotees. It was a good group for the middle of India at that time. Jayapataka Maharaj was there, Giriraj, lots of others. Anyway, as we started walking, I said, Srila Prabhupada, Mahatma Gandhi. And before I could say anything else, he cut me off. Do not criticize Gandhi here. This is his place. They won't understand. And then he changed the subject and, we didn't talk. So the lesson was that, you should be careful what you say depending on where you are. I mean, I could philosophize on that because, for example, in the Western world, Prabhupada used to say Jesus is our guru or Muhammad is our guru. But in Vrindavan, we asked Prabhupada, is it better to worship the demigods or the one God of the Western religions? He said it's better to worship the demigods because by following the Vedic system, you get gradual elevation. And then he said these religions, the Western religions, are the religions of the meat eaters. In a denigrating way, he said this. So for time and circumstance, we have quotations of Gandhi on every Bhagavad-gita. And Gandhi did read the Gita every day. Saying that he was an atheist, it's more accurate to say he was a Mayavadi who didn't believe that Ram and Krishna were incarnations of God. But he believed in a higher power. So Prabhupada did call him Duratma Gandhi at times. He criticized. But at that particular moment, he could not criticize. And we were not to criticize. And it was the wrong venue for criticism. At the opening of the Krishna Balaram temple in Vrindavan in April 1975, well, prior to the opening, Prabhupada had Jasomati Nandan Prabhu go and invite prominent sannyasis who were Mayavadis to the opening. So one of the big Mayavadis refused. Your guru is giving Brahmin threads to foreigners. I can't come. But another one of those big Mayavadis, who's very famous, he's the one who translated the Bhagavatam into Hindi for the Gita press, Akhandanand Saraswati. There was a picture of him and Prabhupada at the opening. He came. And in that picture, I was with Rajashekar, the British devotee, British godbrother, standing behind them. And I saw that picture in Mayapur, and Rajashekar got it and he lost it. He put it in an envelope and mailed it to Bhubaneswar and it got lost. But the point was that, people might ask, well, why did Prabhupada invite these Mayavadis to the opening of the temple? Devotees have told me, even recently, we hate Mayavadis, but actually it's not like that. The Advaitins, they follow the same Shastras. They revere the Bhagavatam even, the Puranas and all the Vedic literature. And when it comes to Vedas, there's no difference. The difference is in the interpretation of Vedanta, where Adi Shankaracharya says that the impersonal is the real absolute truth. And the Vaishnavacharyas say Vishnu, Krishna. Chaitanya Charitamrita says there's no difference between, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said there's no difference between the name of Krishna and Vishnu. Or there's no difference between Krishna and Vishnu. So Vaishnava means follower of Vishnu. But otherwise, we share the same culture. The Vedic culture, only the Mayavadis worship demigods and Vaishnavas don't worship demigods. Some Vaishnavas won't go in demigod temples. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went in the demigods' temples and bowed down to the demigods. So we follow Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But there's no difference in the culture. So although we may disagree ideologically on what the ultimate absolute truth is, we are from one culture. So during our 2 days in Wardha, besides meeting with Vinoba Bhave, which was one of the highlights, where Prabhupada showed the pictures, like we used to show pictures to businessmen to make them life members. Prabhupada was showing pictures of ISKCON activities around the world, and very good, Vinoba Bhave was saying. He was a very famous person. And so that showed Prabhupada, there's a little lesson there, how Prabhupada was propagating, even with these people, his activities. Then later on, there was this lecture that Prabhupada was going to give in the college to the students. And there was a couple hundred students and Prabhupada's 30 disciples. And the MC, whoever it was, announced 10 times, Prabhupada will speak in Hindi, Prabhupada will speak in Hindi. And when Prabhupada got the mic, when he was finished, he said, I have been asked to speak in Hindi, but because of my disciples, I will speak in English. And he gave a lecture in English. So from that, we can understand Prabhupada gave special importance to his disciples to try and train them in the philosophy and the ideology of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, he would have lectured to the public there, and the foreign devotees wouldn't have understood a thing. In those days, there wasn't this simultaneous translation facility. It was a long time ago. I was talking 42 years ago almost. Yeah, during the Gaur Purnima festival in 1976, I was in Mayapur. There's a picture of that, by the way, that I have on my Facebook masthead. But Prabhupada had that same situation like he had in Bombay, where he would just meet guests in the afternoon in his room. And I remember some guests, and we were some devotees, there were so many devotees, everybody couldn't go, but some devotees, somehow I got in. And somebody was challenging Prabhupada with some questions. And I cut in, even though I was an unknown, I wasn't a big leader or anything. And I said, if you want to learn from Prabhupada, you have to hear submissively. Because the questions were challenging. It wasn't like, it didn't sound like he was sincere to hear what Prabhupada said. And Prabhupada didn't say anything, so I took it that he approved of what I said. So, that was an experience I had directly with Prabhupada. And if I had done something wrong, I imagine he would have said, wait a minute, or he would have chastised me verbally. But, there's monam sammati lakshanam. Monam means silence. Lakshanam is a sign. Sammati, approval. So silence is a form of approval. So I took it like that he approved of what I said. And I didn't say anything wrong. And the conversation went on. So we're on the morning walk with Prabhupada in Vrindavan. Brahmananda and I were from the Jewish backgrounds. And we started discussing the Jews and Albert Einstein or what, I can't remember all the words. So during this talk, I asked the question, Srila Prabhupada, is it better to worship the one God of the Western religions or worship the demigods? Now, why did I ask that question? Because there's a lot of propaganda, anti-Hindu propaganda by the followers of the Western religions that Hinduism is polytheistic. And we're better because we only worship one God. And we, followers of Prabhupada and Vaishnavas, worship one God, Vishnu. And the devatas, the demigods, are his servants in our ideology. Prabhupada's response was that it's better to worship the demigods because by worshiping the demigods, you get gradual elevation, quote unquote. And then again, quote unquote, these religions, the Western religions, is unquote. But, quote, these religions are the religions of the meat eaters. Now, if you think about it, there are a number of Hindus that eat meat. Like in Calcutta, there's a Kali temple where they kill goats. And supposedly they're offered to the goddess Kali. That goes on in Assam also, in Guwahati. There's Kamakya Devi. So Kali Devi, there are different sacrifices in the Vedas for animals also. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu talked with the Chandkazi. Chandkazi said, you also have cow killing. But when Prabhupada said meat eaters, my understanding after all these years and living in India for 44 years, is that he meant those who are cow killers. Why? Well, Prabhupada stressed the protection of the cow 1,000 times or 10,000 times in his lectures, letters. There was the movie Spiritual Frontier. That's another pastime which I'll tell you about. I told you. So when you get elevation, there are different types of elevation. One is elevation to Krishna consciousness. There's a book like that where you understand Vaishnavism, where, that's Gita teaches, aham sarvasya prabhavo, everything comes from me. I'm the source of everything. I'm the supreme God. But there's demigod worship. And so that's where Western religions criticize Hinduism. But Prabhupada said that's better than the Western religions because they, from the root, are contaminated with cow killing.
Je anilo premadana koruna prachu